Welcome to Electrified. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. Joe Tetmeyer today said something big has changed at Giga Texas. We have at least 14 Cybercabs in the outbound lot without steering wheels. Here's a zoomed in look at one of the photos, and very clearly there's no steering wheel. A few things. I see people saying that these are the Cybercabs that will be deployed to the Robotaxi network potentially soon, but I'm not so sure because you'll see the engineering decal still on the side of these vehicles, which to me is a great indication that yes, they may be without a steering wheel, but they're clearly still engineering test vehicles. And when it comes to the great debate, I'm not changing my stance at all, but before everybody starts dunking on Farzad here, don't forget what he actually said. He said that Q2 of 2027 is when he thinks Tesla would build a Cybercab with a steering wheel and pedals. It's true though that framework was under the now faulty assumption that Tesla would be limited to 2,500 Cybercabs per year, but as we learned a few weeks back with Tesla's self-certification, they don't expect to need that exemption, meaning Tesla is not expecting to be limited by that 2,500 unit cap at all. So we're just going to have to wait and see, but certainly an exciting milestone, and as expected, most of April is just going to be these engineering vehicles both with and without steering wheels, and Tesla deploying them across the country for testing, validation, and ultimately getting ready for official production variants that will eventually be deployed to the Robotaxi network. And I say it like that because at this point it is just a matter of testing and validation. The Robotaxi tracker tells us there are now up to 13 unsupervised vehicles in the Austin fleet, which yes, on one hand is not breaking any records, but on the other hand it is up almost 100% just in the past few weeks. So clearly Tesla's FSD software is capable of running unsupervised. The question becomes, how long will Tesla want to test the Cybercab before feeling comfortable deploying that and its camera suite onto the network? And as the supercharger sleuth just pointed out today, Marco said Tesla's planning a major Robotaxi charging build-out in the Phoenix East Valley. Pre-permits were submitted last week for the addition of 56 V4 charging stalls, and the application explicitly states the chargers will not be for public use. So clearly this will be for internal use by Tesla to charge its robotaxis. And I've always thought that Phoenix has a high likelihood of being the next city that Tesla deploys to, but Marco also said Tesla submitted a draft for another proposed location in the city of Mesa, also listed as private use. And of course, this site in Phoenix does not have to be live for Tesla to launch a robotaxi service in the city, but as I've been saying, we should be seeing some fireworks here in the next few months. And as expected, we did get the updated standing SGO from NHTSA for incident data for robotaxis across the country. But rather than sharing it in this brutal CSV file, I just went through it and pulled out all of Tesla's data. Now, unfortunately, Tesla is the only company in this report that redacts most of the crucial information. Under this NHTSA reporting framework, companies have the option to redact under the CBI, confidential business information, and Tesla chose to do so. But the main takeaway with this updated data, now including the month of March, it's true, Tesla had 0 incidents for March, meaning the last one was January of this year. Also, we don't get specific dates, so it just tells us the month and the time, no date. But going back to June last year when Tesla launched the service, total across that entire time through March this year, Tesla had 15 incidents. And in all of those, there was only 1 minor injury. But 5 of those 15 incidents were when Tesla's robotaxis were going 0 miles an hour, meaning somebody else actually hit the Tesla and it wasn't Tesla's fault. So that drops the total where Tesla was at fault down to 10. And the first incident, July 2025, Tesla's robotaxi was going 8 miles an hour and hit a fixed object. But because of the redacted info, we don't know exactly what was hit. And this was the only incident where there was any injury, and again, it was minor. But in this case, the Tesla vehicle was towed. Incident 2 was also in July, and just to be technical, there was a minor injury in this one where apparently it led to a hospitalization. Both Tesla and an SUV were making a right turn around 2 miles an hour. But I'd say there's an asterisk here because the initial reporting had no injury, no hospitalization. That detail was not added until 5 months after the fact. So something to note, but no airbags were deployed for that one, and again, it was a very low speed incident. So I'm not going to read through the specifics of all of these, I just want to give you the timeline. So incident 3 was September last year, incident 4, September of last year. And of course, you can pause if you want to read the detail. Incident 5, October of last year. This was actually the highest speed incident for Tesla, one that occurred at 18 miles an hour. Incident 6 in December. Incident 7 in January. Incident 8 in January. Incident 9, January. And the last one we have, incident 10, also January. So this means Tesla's incident-free months of February and March are the first two back-to-back for the robotaxi service. And for me, I think that's a pretty strong data point as to why we're seeing the unsupervised vehicles start to slowly tick up. And interestingly, if you were pausing to read, most of those incidents were contact with fixed objects. And one other data point I found to be interesting, 6 of those 10 incidents were after 8:30 p.m., meaning they were at night in dark conditions. But Tesla's first ever back-to-back incident-free months is some strong momentum as we head deeper into this ever-important Q2. But as always, to share the good and the bad, Abhimanyu shared this video of his robotaxi basically getting stuck in an infinite loop in a parking garage. He got in his unsupervised ride right at the outside of the parking garage, and I believe the destination was on the other side, but the robotaxi through the navigation went into the parking garage, drove all the way to the top, and then ended the ride at the top of the parking garage. So he restarted the trip, and then the car turned around, went all the way back down, and eventually made it to the destination. And for early adopters who are excited about the tech and want the content for social media, not a huge deal. But for the average person who needs to get somewhere efficiently, not what you want to see. And again, because my understanding is Tesla allowed the navigation to use a bit of this reasoning, they're still figuring things out. But so far, that experiment has not been great. And the fact that Tesla is struggling so mightily with something that really should be so straightforward like navigation really is confounding. But on a positive note, I thought this was somewhat encouraging to show us that the robotaxi software, whatever exact branch they're running, is still quite comparable to what we have on our customer cars. Meaning fleet-wide, at least with AI4 for now, we really all are right there. And for those of you with Hardware 3, just a reminder, the most recent info we have, Ashok said once the version 14 release series is fully done, we're planning on working on a V14 Lite version for Hardware 3. And adjusting for the timing of this comment, he said probably expected in Q2 this year, which would give Tesla until June this year to deliver that. Shifting to Europe, I saw Roland first share the actual agenda for the TCMV meeting coming up on May 5th. And he must have got it from an insider, because if you go to the actual website where they upload these documents, the most recent one is still for March 24th this year. But with that clarification out of the way, this does appear to be an official document. And as expected for this meeting on May 5th, you will see for only 20 minutes, they have the presentation by the Netherlands on an update on Article 39. And what you will not find on this agenda specifically is the vote, which is exactly why I said there's a good chance the RDW makes the presentation at this meeting, but then they wait to hold the vote until the meeting later on June 30th. And given that this presentation and commentary and questioning and all of that likely is not going to happen in 20 minutes, including a vote, I think now the most likely outcome is the vote does happen on June 30th, not at this May 5th meeting. But again, individual countries are free to adopt this approval by the RDW whenever they choose, regardless of what happens with the vote. We had a patent that Tesla filed back October 2024 just get published, and what do you know? It has to do with Tesla's very intricate hand and forearm design for Optimus, and we think for V3. That's because everything we've heard publicly from Elon and the team about what they're planning to do with the new hand, which when I say hand does include the forearm, is actually confirmed and validated in this patent. And the timing here matters because I've seen people say, well, if Tesla filed this back October 2024, then the design likely changed a lot since then. And to some degree, that certainly may be true, but what Tesla did next, I think, tells us a lot more. What Tesla actually did October 2024 was file a placeholder patent, which basically just locks in the timing and Tesla's intent. And with that placeholder filing, Tesla then got 12 months to basically say, hey, if any other company like Figure tries to do anything along these lines after this date, well, we have priority. And from that date, Tesla had 12 months to either let that placeholder filing lapse or to lock it in and file a real patent under the PCT, which is just a single international filing that can cover 150 plus different countries, and it locks in Tesla's initial placeholder date as giving them that priority, and this PCT filing gives Tesla roughly another 2 years to decide exactly what countries it wants protections in, while of course they continue to iterate on the design. So I explained that because if Tesla let the placeholder filing lapse, then okay, they're probably not going forward with that design. But that's not what Tesla did. They did decide to internationalize this patent. And yes, Tesla has started a national filing for China where Elon said he expects the most competition for humanoids. All that to say, what's in this patent outside of maybe some material changes and some minor adjustments is likely what Tesla is planning on sending into production for Optimus V3. So some of the bigger takeaways from this patent: Tesla is officially moving away from having actuators in the hand itself, moving those into the forearm, which again is biomimetic. It's going to mimic our biomechanics. And it'll result in much less weight in the hand. Tesla refers to that as distal weight because it's the furthest part away from the center of the robot, meaning the hand is going to be a lot lighter and more nimble and easier to maneuver, ultimately resulting in more precise activity. Also in the patent, it's confirmed each Optimus arm is going to have 25 actuators, 23 for the fingers and then 2 for the wrist. And I think arguably one of the biggest breakthroughs in this patent is how Tesla is dealing with cable management, meaning the way Tesla is going to simulate our tendons using cables. Typically, a big problem with humanoids is when there's movement in the wrist, you're going to have those cables going from the forearm into the hand. So when the wrist moves, you're going to get some of those cables being yanked on and they have to extend and they contract. Meaning sometimes when the wrist moves, you'll get tweaking or twitching in the fingers because those cables are getting yanked from the movement of the wrist. But in this patent, Tesla has found a solution to that problem. Meaning Tesla will have 22 degrees of freedom in each hand, and the rough expectation is that a human hand is around 27 degrees of freedom, which would put the Optimus hand right there very close to human dexterity. And one other major solution is how Tesla's going to use these curved rolling contact surfaces, which will mimic our knuckles. So each of the 4 fingers, not the thumb, are going to have these 4 different segments. And then the cables, which are simulating the tendons, are going to be placed precisely in these channels and grooves. Some will be routed behind the joints, and then some will be routed in front. So ultimately, each segment will be able to bend independently, again, without yanking on the cables. And so this is going to give Tesla that dexterity and all those degrees of freedom with very few parts per finger. As in this design, Tesla only has 3 of these thin braided polymer tendons in each finger. So as Tesla has said all along, this design is aimed for mass volume manufacturing. And because each finger is going to have 3 of those thin flexible cables, which are mimicking the tendons, those are going to run from the actuators in the forearm through the wrist into the palm and then along those integrated channels or grooves inside each finger. And because of Tesla's creativity here with that cable management and where they're placing those, it's going to avoid all of that unwanted motion and any twitching, if you will, of yanking on cables when you don't want it. And each finger is going to have 4 segments of those rolling contact joints, while the thumb will have 3. And for these segments, those contact surfaces roll against each other instead of rotating around a fixed pin, which should give a much more natural bending motion and let that pivot point move a little bit as the finger curls, which of course more closely simulates how a real finger works. And the wrist can now move in two directions. It can tilt up and down and then rotate side to side. And it looks like Tesla will do this using only 2 motors instead of 4. And Tesla's doing this by moving both motors in the same direction to tilt the wrist and then moving them in opposite directions to rotate it. So it appears to be a mechanical trick that'll reduce the weight and the overall parts without really having to sacrifice much range of motion. But again, it seems like one of the coolest things in here is how Tesla is handling these cables or the tendons. So throughout the forearm part, those cables are stacked horizontally, but then as they go through the wrist right here, through that transition zone they call it, they then flip to being stacked vertically. But this entire bundle, when it goes right through the wrist, is placed perfectly so the wrist can still rotate and move around freely without impacting this stack of cables. Of course, I'll have the whole patent linked below. I'll be honest though, I feel like I need some more time with it to really understand because there's a lot more in there, of course. And it is pretty technical, but I think this is certainly signal that Tesla is planning to move forward with this design given the behavior around the filing of the patent. And if you're thinking, well, wait a second, now this is out there, other companies can copy what Tesla's doing. But guys, don't forget what happened on the auto side. Tesla's stuff has been out there for years. The other companies still can't copy them because Tesla makes so many of these parts in-house, vertically integrated. You cannot go buy these things off a shelf. And with Optimus, to some degree, Tesla will actually be making the machines that make the parts, whether themselves or in partnership with their suppliers. So maybe a brand new robotics startup can look at this and say, okay, this is a good blueprint for how we can move forward, but for all the existing companies that already have their own things in place, the complexity here is just not something that can be easily duplicated. And oh, by the way, if Tesla actually wanted to enforce the patent, well, if it gets granted, then they can. With very serendipitous timing based on what we've been talking about lately, this study was just published, EV Battery Second Life and Recycling Pathways. It says, we assess the economics in repurposing and recycling of EV batteries by estimating the maximum acquisition price that repurposers and recyclers, like Redwood Materials, could pay for used EV packs across cathode chemistries, first life conditions, second life applications, and recycling processes. The takeaway, we find that repurposing is more economical than recycling for LFP batteries due to their relatively long life and low value materials, whereas recycling is generally more economical than repurposing for lithium nickel cobalt aluminum oxide or NCA batteries due to their shorter life and higher value materials. But again, over time, this may be changing based on Jeff Dawn and his lab and what they just showed about the cycle life of these nickel-based batteries. But for now, to focus on the main takeaway from this study, they're saying that rather than recycling LFP battery packs, it's actually more economical to use them in a second life for battery storage. So it's not just something that can happen. Economically, it's actually something that should happen. They said, we estimate the repurposing costs of around $12 per kilowatt hour at the pack level, and that's for a Tesla Model S pack. And this is not just hypothetical for Tesla. In the study, they said we used Model S packs as our base case, which have a nameplate capacity of 85 kilowatt hours. Just know you can't take the $12 per kilowatt hour and multiply it by 85 and then say, whoa, it's only going to cost about $1,000 to turn a Model S battery pack into battery storage, because that number alone would really just be for validation of the battery pack. You would still need enclosures and inverters and some other things before it can actually function for battery storage. But the takeaway here is that over the next 10 years, as this industry develops, we're going to have much more flexibility, not just as customers, but as Tesla and what it can do with its used vehicles as these battery packs reach their end of life on the roads. And it's just so frustrating to me because we still have millions of people that think these battery packs are a liability when they're done in the EVs, and clearly that is absolutely not the case. Tesla is now suing the state of North Dakota in its quest to open a pair of car dealerships in Bismarck and Fargo. And they just had a hearing Monday this week. This because right now North Dakota law prohibits vehicle manufacturers from owning car dealerships and requires them to sell their products to franchise dealerships for resale. Tesla is asking the court to declare the company does not fall within the definition of manufacturer contained in state law. If the court disagrees and Tesla is determined to be a manufacturer under the law, Tesla's asking the court to determine whether an exception in the statute applies to their case. Tesla just wants to be able to sell its cars in North Dakota and not force customers who would wish to buy a Tesla vehicle to have to drive to Minnesota or another state to do it. Court documents said there are more than 800 Tesla vehicles registered in North Dakota, which is painfully low, but clearly, effectively, these Tesla vehicles have been unavailable in the state. And the AG in North Dakota, like a real you-know-what, said Tesla can operate in North Dakota the same way that every other manufacturer does. They can appoint dealers, they can enter into franchise agreements, and they can sell through that. The worst part, Tesla would not automatically get licenses for its 2 proposed dealerships if the company prevails in the case. A favorable ruling by the court would only allow Tesla to reapply and give it the opportunity to convince the North Dakota Department of Transportation it meets all the other legal requirements for a dealership license. One bit of information, take it or leave it, North Dakota is one of the biggest oil producers in the United States. It contributes tens of billions of dollars annually to the North Dakota economy. So of course that industry heavily influences the direction that North Dakota state is going, which is part of why it's been such a laggard with EVs to date. Tesla's spring software update is now rolling out. One undocumented change, it looks like the shortcut icons at the bottom of the UI are now bigger. And one of the robotaxi features for the rear screen in the cars is now coming to customer vehicles. You can actually see the destination and arrival time from the back screen, as we said. So for all the parents having to answer the question from the kids, are we there yet? There you go. Tesla will be celebrating its official launch into Estonia this month on April 24th, and they'll be hosting an event on that day to celebrate. Now, Estonia is a pretty small market. They do maybe 25,000 auto sales a year. EVs are maybe in the neighborhood of a few thousand units per year. So this won't be a huge needle mover, but there is some charging infrastructure already set up there, so nice to see Tesla finally enter the market. Samsung has completed preparations for the operation of its foundry in Taylor, Texas, and will hold a major equipment installation ceremony on the 24th of this month. Bear in mind, this marks 3.5 years since the first groundbreaking in November 2022. And this plant was initially set to enter operations in October 2024, but as we've covered, there have been multiple delays. Samsung plans to produce Tesla's AI5 and AI6 using the 2nm process at this plant. And the timeline checks out. We have this equipment installed. They'll need likely at least a year before they can get yields anywhere near to stable for production for Tesla, which takes us to where we've been expecting sometime late 2027 for actual AI5 maybe being out in the wild. Tesla's now getting ready to launch the Model YL in India, and that could happen as early as next week. Since we had a lot of other things to talk about today, I'm not going to do a deep dive on what Elon said here, but I do feel like I owe a short explanation since I said I'd give it. When he said both chips, AI5 and AI6, have around half of the trip AI computation accelerators dedicated to SRAM, so effective memory bandwidth is an order of magnitude greater than DRAM bandwidth for any calculations in SRAM cache. So back to AI5, those trip AI accelerators are just Tesla's in-house name for how it does all of the tensor or the matrix level math for these neural nets. Just like Google has its custom TPUs, its tensor processing units, Tesla's trip AI accelerators are effectively the same thing, and they'd be in this processing die here in the middle. And what Elon is saying is Tesla made a trade-off, and they decided to give up some of the raw flop compute power of this processing die, and instead they're dedicating it to SRAM, which at the simplest form can just be thought of as much faster memory. And then on the sides, as we talked about, we have a separate memory that would still be classified as DRAM, which is a bit slower than SRAM. And while yes, this DRAM is integrated on this package right here, it's technically off the main processing die, unlike the SRAM, which is on it. So as Elon said, around half of the trip AI accelerators on this main processing die are actually dedicated to SRAM, which is part of how Tesla gets that order of magnitude improvement in memory bandwidth for any of those math calculations that are done on the SRAM. Because again, it's right next to the main processing compute in this central die, much closer than the DRAM on the sides, although even that is still close relative to AI4. But something tells me we're not done talking about this, so maybe on a slower news day in the future we can revisit this. But for now, all I can say is that we desperately one day need a documentary on Tesla's engineering team and how it made many of these decisions. decisions. Tesla Manufacturing shared a new video with Lars over at Giga Berlin, and when it comes to the GigaCast process, previously the cycle time was around 120 seconds, but at Giga Berlin they got that down to 68 seconds.
So we figured out we have some areas that are too hot and we have a much better cooling system now, and that's why we can run so fast.
I mean, to get 30% better cooling out of the same machine is really impressive, but what's even more impressive is I know that you built this team from like nothing. When we made gigacastings, no one in the world was doing it, so we had to start with people that just had an interest.
Yeah, this team is really the pirates. At the beginning we started it up, and it was at the beginning we had a lot of problems, you know that. And that's why also we developed with this engineering team the whole process in a direction that we are running much smoother. If you see the spirit of the team members, they are fighting every second to get the best out of this job.
So I just realized that for the past 30 minutes, I have been recording with my mic on mute. And I have to get somewhere tonight, so I don't have time to go back and re-record all of that. Now, it wasn't crucial information, but if you're wondering, why didn't Dylan talk about this today? Well, likely there's your answer. My bad. But real quick, I will point out data from S&P Global showed that in Q4, SpaceX bought about 18% of the Cybertrucks that were sold. SpaceX bought 1,279 of the just over 7,000 that were sold in Q4. Tesla stock closed the day at $400.62, up 3.01%, while the NDX was up 1.3%. The volume was 36% higher than the average. So again, my apologies for that recording blunder, but hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters.